the Packaging Technology Today Thought Leader Interview Series. I'm Vicki Castori, Managing Editor. Today we're taking a closer look at one of the fastest growing segments in food packaging, snacks. As snackers crave healthier grab-and-go foods, the snack aisle has shifted towards the refrigerator case. In this episode, we'll explore how innovations like software-controlled magnetic shuttle technology and advanced tray sealing are rewriting the rules for snacks and case-ready packaging. My guest today is Carlo Bergonzi, Product Manager for the Tray Seal Division at Harpak-ULMA. Thank you for joining me, Carlo.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, happy to be here and talk through some of these topics.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a fascinating topic and really interesting technology. So I'm excited to share this with our listeners. So to start with the big picture, what's changing in the snack category and how is that transforming package design and production?
Yeah, well, I think the category is expanding from what we would traditionally think of as snacks in terms of salty, sweet treats that might be a less frequent choice to protein forward, in some cases, nutrition and ingredient quality forward snack kits that are basically being chosen in some cases as meal replacements. And I think a lot of these are converging trends. So the rise of convenience and on-the-go options, the breakdown of those 3 meals a day, and then the rise of protein. So, U.S. government through the Department of Health just doubled the daily recommendation, the daily intake, which is a substantial change in guidance. So we see a huge change in behavior there, huge change from the GLP-1s. So those have become extremely pervasive as a treatment. I think it's 1 in 8 adults now, and that's projected to go to 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 by 2035 that have used a GLP-1 agonist. And those drive a very specific behavior as well from a portion perspective with the smaller portions, but then a clinical perspective with the guidance towards maintaining the protein intake in small hits of protein throughout the day. So all this kind of comes together with our customers expanding their volumes for these types of products and also bringing a lot of new products to market.
So, what do these changes mean for manufacturers, and what challenges come up most often in your conversations with your customers?
Yeah, so handling this increase in volume is one challenge. So having to take on additional capacity, that takes the form of us being able to provide solutions quickly and have them run, on time with efficiency. There's definitely proliferation of SKU counts with these types of formats. So being able to set up the lines that are, flexible lines with regard to front end automation, filling, dosing, different ingredients going into the same format. Uh, then there are sort of newer types of formats, including, kits with dressing cups, with fresh produce, with pouches, and other items that we just have to be aware of from a vacuum and gas and operations perspective for modified atmosphere. So I think all this kind of comes together in the form of flexibility, being able to have one system that is set up to handle a variety of different front end ingredients and then different footprints for the primary packaging.
So, as these product lines continue to grow, how is technology helping manufacturers keep pace? And can you share an example of how one of these trends has changed the way a customer approaches packaging or production?
Yeah, I think the ability to have a central controller and a good sort of recipe management that translates to the servo controls, the robotics, the vision, uh, the ability to programmatically perform changeover. These can all help maintain efficiency and quality control when you're switching between, different SKUs. We have customers that have dozens of SKUs on the same line. Oftentimes, those take the form of different footprints and formats. One example, we have a customer who had, 70 plus SKUs on a highly automated line, but it was all in the same format. So using a centralized controller, we were able to perform all these changeovers programmatically. So of course, the different materials have to be supplied to the line and those need to change, but the equipment handles the changeovers from there. There was no mechanical changeover in that example. So I think one key aspect is, of course, trying to limit this mechanical changeover between formats. So it's common to change over tray-specific parts or container-specific parts when switching footprints and formats, the seal tooling, the denester. But these are relatively simple changeovers that, our operators are very used to. And so, you know, we're talking 5 minutes to change over these parts. So if you can limit it to that, and then have more of a programmatic changeover on some of the other aspects, the filling, the front end, vision inspection, primary loading, that's where we look to employ a lot of that, a lot of the software and really ease with that changeover.
So one of the themes that we're hearing in our interviews across the industry is the need to do more with the same people, equipment, and floor space. So from an engineering standpoint, what innovations are making the biggest difference?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. We are seeing very high utilization rates across the industry in terms of equipment and almost a saturation of existing facilities in some cases. So the high level focus from our customers becomes throughput per unit area of the facility. So of course, replacing legacy equipment with higher speed lines is always an option. Oftentimes, the efficiency that comes with that also makes it a lot easier to justify. So we could put in a high-speed traditional line. But if they're really topped out in terms of throughput, we can put in something like a next generation line, like our intelligent track systems, that's integrated with the tray sealer that allows us to get a lot more throughput per unit area than maybe a traditional line would. So we're having to go to basically different style equipment to increase the throughput. Another approach is through Premier integration. So we work very closely together with our partners when designing systems such that they are set up and designed to be integrated together from the start. So instead of just general controls integration, we also look at the mechanical and the physical integration of the equipment in ways that streamline the operation and then in some cases also reduce the footprint. Having similar, frames that are, easily mechanically integrated. So we look at that with the upstream and the downstream equipment, both within our own portfolio, but also with our partners to make sure we can reduce that footprint and make it as efficient as possible from a square foot perspective.
So, in terms of the technology, when we met at Pack Expo last year, you showed me the Sinfonia Tray Sealer. Can you explain the problems it's designed to solve and how it differs from a conventional conveyor-based tray sealing system?
Yeah, the Sinfonia is the model brand name for our ICT tray sealing system, ICT being independent cart technology. So you'll hear this sort of referred to as intelligent track systems, smart transport systems, linear motor systems. Uh, we're seeing this type of technology leveraged a lot more in the packaging industry across a number of different types of equipment. At a high level, it's basically in a more advanced automation transport method that replaces a traditional mechanical conveyor, the belts, the chains, indexers, with individually controlled, magnetically propelled carts moving along a modular track. And so there's some key advantages there. First being this software-defined flexibility, kind of in the vein that we just discussed. So you know, product spacing, accumulation, indexing, and routing. That's all entirely managed via software code rather than being, mechanical cams, gears, timing chains, adjustments, and changes. And then, each cart can move completely independently and dynamically from one another. So this allows us to present all the different units in the system to the different operations on the line in a way that's optimal for that specific operation, as opposed to having each operation conform to the set pitch and timing schedule of the traditional conveyor. This also allows you this dynamic buffering, so carts can dynamically buffer products between the processes. And that smooths out these micro stops upstream or downstream without shutting down the entire line. And then in addition, the positioning of these carts is very precise. So, 10 micron positional accuracy, which is ideal for precise dispensing, filling, sealing, and other operations. And of course, any changes between all these different SKUs can be programmed in. And this all basically comes together as higher automation efficiency. So, then in terms of throughput, these types of systems are capable of very high speed and acceleration. So, up to 4 meters a second and 7 Gs of acceleration on the carts. So the bottleneck, really actually comes down to just the change in inertia to the product, making sure we keep that in the containers. So, this can transform some applications that were, let's say, 200 units per minute to 500 units per minute. And then, we move on to, maintenance. So where traditional mechanical drives, oftentimes you'll have, friction wear. ICT systems have virtually no mechanical wear parts outside of certain components on the carts. So that reduces this, maintenance downtime and operations. We touched on the footprint with the modular track. The line configurations can often be made a lot smaller from a square foot perspective while achieving the same or higher throughput. So these are all advantages to smart conveyance, but Mondini's big innovation with the Sinfonia is the direct integration of the actual tray sealer. So using the carts themselves as the bottom tooling, sealing trays, while they sit in the carts. This eliminates the need for any infeed belts, pusher arms, belt transfers, and all these different points can be very critical failure points for high-speed applications. So eliminating those helps with the efficiency as well.
So, can you share a real-world example of how those improvements translate into the day-to-day operations of one of your customers?
Yeah, and specifically focusing on OEE or overall equipment effectiveness, you know, that's critical for these types of applications. A difference of 1% can be, several $100,000 on the total cost of ownership when we're talking about these very high volume products. So, one example is a robotic pick and place. A traditional conveyor, if you're early with the pick, you don't gain that time back if the tray is not in the position in that time frame. And then if you're late with the pick, you actually miss the placement in some cases. So, with the smart track system, it's able to adapt to that natural ebb and flow of, that some automation has. So the tray in this case is always available. And again, with the tray conforming to the timing of the automation, not the other way around. And so that alone can contribute significantly to efficiency. And so we say, 1%, that could be several percent across, a number of different operations. And that's sort of a real world, sort of mechanistic example of how we see these types of systems justifying themselves is if you can get additional efficiency out of your different automation, then it's well worth it when efficiency is so critical.
So, yeah, in addition to efficiency, another priority right now is sustainable packaging strategies. So, how is this technology helping manufacturers reduce waste, improve material efficiency, and support more sustainable packaging?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways that you could approach, achieving this higher sustainability in general. It's a bit of a broad term. And these are typically mapped to, these larger corporate initiatives, and then in the US, state ordinances around material use. So, kind of the first way is simply reducing overall plastics and materials. And you'll see this in terms in those, in the corporate initiatives in terms of, say Walmart reducing 10% virgin plastic by 2030. Um, and so this can be done in a variety of different ways, but for example, down gauging rigid materials, reducing scrap, higher utilization on lidding films, or changing the format completely from say a clamshell to a tray with a film seal. That can reduce your plastics on a unit basis by 40%. So in terms of developments, through the Mondini line, for example, we have down gauge technology in our tooling that allows the use of very thin gauge PET plastic trays, even for skin applications down to 300 micron without heat deformation. We've got other technologies like Darfresh on tray, where the lidding film is pre-cut and applied to the tray. So that results in zero film waste, so the 100% utilization. We're also now introducing things like AI vision to watch the thickness on the film scrap as it's coming off the machine to sort of warn and prevent film breaks. And that also further reduces scrap. So there's a number of things that we can do in that area. Of course, the second approach, moving is just completely moving away from traditional plastic resin materials to renewable materials, recyclable materials such as paperboard, molded fiber, pressed board, these types of craft materials. And there's been a lot of work done in this area to ensure that there's no performance or manufacturing operations drop off if you were to make a switch like that. Of course, we see that a lot of these materials are leveraged in Europe. We have a lot of options in this area. For example, Mondini's paper seal, which can include moisture and atmospheric barrier liners for modified atmosphere, denesting features, zero trim plastic liners. This really allows it to fit seamlessly into existing equipment and operations, right into the denester and so on. And we see the same with molded fiber. There's a lot of flexibility there with the geometry, but you lose some of the branding and the billboard space that you get with the paperboard. So there's a lot of options. A lot of customers and retailers are very interested in these alternative materials. Ultimately, it does come down to a sort of material cost question in most cases. Where the Sinfonia fits in, because of the independent cart, it provides this area for us to form paperboard packaging. So in terms of full systems, a lot of systems were able to form a multi-piece paperboard container, one piece flange. Keeping the flanges one piece is critical to avoid voids in the seal, especially for modified atmosphere. And then we can form the paperboard container, apply a liner material, load the product, apply a lid seal, all with automation and inspection, all in the same system. And so some of those increases in material costs can be negated by that efficiency. And so that allows some of these things to be adopted when normally you'd have some preventative unit cost economics. And then kind of the third approach, and this is mostly from the corporate pledges, is around carbon neutrality. So how can we as equipment suppliers affect supply chains for our downstream customers in this way? One thing we can do, what would typically be a preformed rigid tray application, instead we can move that to a dedicated thermoformer application. Mondini has developed what's called the platformer, which is specialized thermoformer that actually forms a tray with all the hallmarks of a preformed container. So that includes the turned down edges and flanges, the thicker gauges, but uses roll stock. So this allows our tray customers to make more efficient material shipments from a trucking perspective. So could reduce shipments anywhere from a factor of 5 to 10 by going to roll stock versus nested preformed trays, but without compromising anything on the actual container, on the package. And so those are kind of some of the ways, those different avenues that we help our customers achieve their sustainability, their broad sustainability goals.
So a lot's changed, even since the first time we met. It's always fascinating to hear. So looking ahead the next 3 to 5 years, what technologies or market trends do you think will have the biggest impact on snack and case-ready packaging? And what should snack manufacturers be thinking about today to prepare?
I think AI and automation continue to have the biggest potential for impact. We're looking to leverage, we are leveraging AI in a number of different ways um, that we know are critical for our customers. So from an ease of use standpoint, from a troubleshooting perspective, allowing all that to be leveraged by the operator, either on machine or on the edge or, hosted somewhere. We're also using AI vision, as I mentioned earlier, areas like the in-feed belt, the tooling, looking at things like the scrap wind-up materials to ensure everything's positioned properly. If there's products out of place, in any way, basically anything that could cause a stoppage and try and intervene from a preventative standpoint. Um, and this can really increase efficiency, but also improve the equipment over time, based on these inputs. Um, all this basically comes down to total cost of ownership, increasing automation and reducing the total cost of ownership. So, in terms of what manufacturers should be looking at or doing today to future-proof, I would say, one of the big considerations is, of course, equipment with an open controls architecture. So, from the perspective of integrating with MES or ERP systems, as AI allows these systems to become more advanced, having equipment that can seamlessly integrate is will be key moving forward. Um, and as the equipment, this is basically the origin of a lot of this data and key information that's going to be fed up through these systems. And so having, good clean data that's available to the rest of your systems from, an AI perspective, um, I think is super important.
Well, thank you, Carlo. I really appreciate you taking time to share your perspective with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, you've been listening to Carlo Bergonzi, Product Manager for the Tray Seal Division at Harpak-ULMA. To learn more about Harpak-ULMA's innovations, visit the links in the episode notes. You can also find this interview and more industry conversations at packagingtechtoday.com. Thank you for listening.